Deterrence AI, the leading blog in proactive security.
All right, so we've been looking at some really interesting stuff about security lately, and one thing that just keeps coming up over and over again is this idea of deterrence.
Yeah.
We hear about it all the time, right? Deterrence. But when you really stop and think about it, what does it actually mean?
Mm.
What are we really talking about, whether it's, our own personal safety at home or, like big global security issues?
Right.
So for this deep dive, we are going to unpack Robert Taylor's The Power of Deterrence and really get down to the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book, actually.
Yeah. And we are going to figure out how to use this idea of deterrence to discourage those unwanted actions, right, in all the parts of our lives. I mean, we are going to look at the psychology of deterrence. We're going to see how it plays out in the real world. And we're even going to explore how artificial intelligence is already starting to change the game.
Fascinating stuff.
By the time we're done, you're going to have a solid grasp on this concept, and you'll be able to see how it applies to pretty much any security challenge you might face.
Absolutely. And you know what? When we talk about security, a lot of times people immediately think about prevention.
Yeah.
Like, how do we stop something bad from happening right here, right now?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But deterrence is something different. Deterrence is like this proactive approach to security.
Okay, I like that word, proactive. It's like getting ahead of the game.
Exactly.
Instead of just reacting to something that's already happening.
It's about influencing decisions before any action has even been taken. It's like setting the stage so that anyone who's even thinking about doing something harmful takes a look at all the potential downsides and they think, you know what? Not worth it.
So it sounds like the psychology of deterrence is like the foundation here.
It really is.
It's not just about building walls and putting up fences.
Right.
It's about getting inside the minds of those who might pose a threat.
That's exactly what the power of deterrence lays out.
Yeah.
At its core, deterrence really boils down to a kind of cost-benefit analysis that's happening in someone's head.
Okay, so like a mental calculation.
Precisely. Anyone who's thinking about doing something negative is constantly weighing what they stand to gain against what they might lose.
Right, so it's like a balanced scale in their mind.
Exactly. And effective deterrence is about tipping those scales decisively towards the loss side.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we tip those scales?
Well, the book lays out 3 key elements that we can work with: certainty, severity, and swiftness.
Okay, those are some powerful words. Break those down for me.
So certainty, that's all about how likely it is that someone will actually face negative consequences if they go through with whatever action they are contemplating.
So like if someone thinks, there's a really high chance I'm going to get caught if I do this, that's a big deterrent.
Absolutely. The higher the perceived certainty of getting caught, the less appealing the action becomes. Then there's severity.
Okay, severity.
Severity is about how bad those consequences will be if they do happen.
So like, is it just a slap on the wrist, or is it something that's going to cause some serious damage?
Exactly. The more severe the potential consequences, the stronger the deterrent effect. And then finally, we have swiftness.
Swiftness.
This refers to how quickly those consequences will follow the action.
So it's not just about the punishment itself, but also how quickly it comes down.
Precisely.
That makes sense. I mean, if you know you're going to get punished immediately, you're much less likely to do something than if you think you can get away with it for a while.
Exactly. Immediate consequences have a much stronger deterrent effect than delayed ones.
So the key takeaway here is that we're not necessarily talking about absolute prevention.
Right.
We're talking about strategically manipulating how someone perceives these 3 factors.
Exactly. We're shaping their understanding of certainty, severity, and swiftness to make the choice we want them to make, the most obvious one.
Now, the article you sent also mentioned something called cognitive biases, but specifically something called the availability heuristic.
Oh, yeah, that's a fascinating concept.
Yeah, so how does that factor into all of this?
Well, it turns out that on top of those logical calculations of risk that we were just talking about, our brains often take these mental shortcuts.
Yeah, we're all about efficiency, right?
Exactly. And these shortcuts are called cognitive biases. One of the most relevant ones in this context is the availability heuristic.
Okay, the availability heuristic.
Basically, this heuristic says that we tend to overestimate the likelihood of events that are easy for us to recall or that are really vivid in our minds.
So like if something's been in the news a lot recently, we might think it's way more common than it actually is?
Exactly. So let's say there's been a recent high-profile cyber attack.
Mm-hmm.
Even if statistically the chances of that same type of attack happening to you are pretty low,
Yeah.
people might still freak out and think, oh my gosh, I'm next, because it's so fresh in their minds.
Right. It's like that fear factor kicks in.
Exactly. And that's why understanding this availability heuristic is so important when we're crafting deterrent messages.
Okay, so it's not just about presenting the cold hard facts. It's about understanding how our brains process and remember information.
Precisely. If we want to make a deterrent message really stick, we need to tap into those cognitive biases.
So like highlight those recent examples where people face serious consequences for certain actions.
Exactly.
Even if the actual odds of those consequences happening haven't really changed that much.
Yeah, we can amplify that perceived certainty and severity.
That's really interesting. Okay, so we've talked about the psychology behind deterrence. Let's bring this down to earth a little bit and talk about how these principles actually play out in the real world.
Sure.
So both in physical security and cybersecurity, right?
Absolutely. Let's start with physical security.
Okay.
Imagine you're walking through a parking garage late at night.
Okay. A little spooky.
What are some of the things that would make you feel safer?
Well, I definitely feel better if there were bright lights everywhere
Yes, exactly.
and maybe some obvious security cameras.
Right.
And if I saw a security guard patrolling the area, that would definitely make me feel more comfortable.
Those are all tangible deterrents.
They're like sending a clear message.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They increase that sense of certainty that if anyone tries anything funny,
Yeah.
they're going to get caught.
Right. And it's not just about being seen. It's also about making it harder for someone to actually do something bad.
Absolutely. Think about a building with strong locks and a good alarm system.
Okay. Yeah. Those are pretty standard.
But they are standard for a reason. They make it way more difficult for an intruder to get in.
Right. They increase the cost in terms of time and effort.
And risk.
And risk.
And that makes that target less appealing compared to one that doesn't have those deterrents in place.
So it's like that old saying, don't be the low-hanging fruit.
Exactly. The source material calls this target hardening.
Makes sense. Make yourself a hard target. Now, when we switch over to the cyber world, it's a little different. Right? We don't have security guards patrolling our networks,
Not in the traditional sense, no.
but the same principles still apply.
Absolutely. We just have to translate them into the digital realm.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, think about strong, unique passwords and using multi-factor authentication.
Right, I hear about those all the time.
They are like the digital equivalent of locks on a door.
Okay.
They make it significantly harder for someone to gain unauthorized access to your accounts and information.
And then we have things like intrusion detection systems and firewalls.
Those are like your invisible alarms.
Okay.
They enhance the certainty that any malicious activity will be detected.
So even if someone does manage to slip through one layer of security,
They are going to hit another one.
right, it's all about creating multiple layers of security.
It's called defense in depth.
Defense in depth.
You don't want just one impenetrable barrier. You want a whole series of obstacles that an attacker would have to overcome.
And with each obstacle, the risk of getting caught goes up.
Exactly.
And the effort required just keeps increasing.
It's all about making that cost-benefit analysis really unfavorable for the attacker.
And one thing the book really emphasizes is that this isn't a set it and forget it kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely not.
We need to be constantly evaluating our security and looking for weaknesses.
Regular security audits and vulnerability assessments are crucial.
Yeah, those sound important.
They are how we identify any chinks in our armor,
Chinks in the armor, I like that.
any weaknesses that could undermine our deterrence efforts.
So it's like a constant process of checking and adjusting.
Precisely. Deterrence isn't static.
Because the threats are always evolving.
Exactly. The landscape of threats is constantly changing, so we need to adapt our defenses accordingly.
By proactively finding and fixing those vulnerabilities,
We maintain the credibility of our deterrence.
we're showing potential attackers that we're not messing around.
We are vigilant.
And if they try anything, they're going to run into a very sophisticated, very up-to-date defense system.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've laid the psychological foundation. We've looked at how these principles work in both physical security and cybersecurity. Now let's talk about the really mind-blowing part of all of this.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence.
AI is changing everything.
It feels like AI has the potential to completely revolutionize the whole idea of deterrence.
It absolutely does. AI gives us this incredible ability to analyze huge amounts of data at lightning speed.
Yeah, it can see patterns and make predictions that would take humans forever.
Exactly. It's like having a million security analysts working for you 24/7.
So we're moving from a reactive approach to a much more proactive and even anticipatory approach to security.
That's the real game changer with AI. It allows us to enhance the certainty and swiftness of our responses in a way that we never could before.
And that's really shifting that cost-benefit equation for the attackers.
Absolutely. Suddenly the risks are much higher and the rewards are much lower.
Can you give me some real-world examples of how AI is already making a difference in this area?
Sure. Think about surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
We've got AI-powered systems now that can analyze live video feeds from security cameras. They can identify things that might seem out of place or suspicious behaviors that a human operator might miss.
So it's like having an extra set of eyes that never get tired.
Exactly, and that dramatically increases the certainty of detection in physical spaces.
And what about in cybersecurity?
AI is already being used to sift through massive amounts of threat intelligence data.
Mm-hmm.
It can spot emerging attack patterns and even predict which organizations are most likely to be targeted next.
So we can actually get ahead of the curve and strengthen our defenses in those areas.
Precisely. We're not just waiting for an attack to happen. We are trying to anticipate it and prevent it altogether.
That's incredible. And I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but AI can also automate a lot of our security responses.
That's a huge advantage. If malicious activity is detected, AI can trigger a series of pre-programmed actions.
Yeah.
Like instantly isolating a compromised computer from the network.
Right, to prevent the spread of malware.
Exactly, or sending alerts to the security team.
Right. So instead of waiting for someone to notice something's wrong and then scramble to respond,
the AI can take immediate action.
and that swiftness of response is absolutely critical.
It makes a huge difference.
So AI is really creating this much more agile and responsive security environment.
It really is.
And as AI technology continues to develop,
those capabilities are only going to get more powerful.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive into the world of deterrence.
It's such an interesting concept.
And it really seems like the true power of deterrence lies in influencing decisions.
Right.
It's about making those who might be considering doing something bad seriously reconsider their actions before they even take that first step.
It's about making the right choice the easiest choice.
Exactly. And we've explored how that works by understanding the psychological factors that drive decision-making, by putting practical deterrent strategies in place in both the physical world and the digital world.
Right.
And now with AI starting to play this increasingly important role.
It's really a game changer.
And it's clear that deterrence is not a static concept.
It's constantly evolving.
We have to be adaptive.
We have to be one step ahead.
Always anticipating what the next threat might be.
And staying informed about the latest technologies.
Both the ones that are being used to carry out attacks,
right,
and the ones that we can use to defend ourselves.
Absolutely.
So as you think about everything we've talked about today, I want you to consider something. How might these core principles of deterrence, certainty, severity, and swiftness of consequences apply to other areas of your life?
Yeah.
I mean, not just traditional security contexts.
Right.
Think about your own personal goals, your work environment, your relationships, understanding these dynamics, how these principles can influence behavior.
Yeah.
It's incredibly powerful.
And it can be applied to so many different areas.
It's about understanding what motivates people to make certain decisions, and then using that knowledge to encourage more of the outcomes that we want to see in the world.
That's the real power of deterrence.
It's not just about preventing bad things from happening.
Yeah.
It's about creating a world where those bad things are less likely to happen in the first place.
Food for thought.
Absolutely.
Yeah.